This meeting is being recorded.
Good morning. Hull and Chandler is a law firm dedicated to getting positive results for clients facing real-world obstacles and problems. Whether you're a small business trying to manage legal obstacles, a victim of an auto accident seeking to be made whole, or hoping to take care of the will that you've too long put off, our award-winning attorneys are available to assist you. Please visit our website at hullandchandler.com or call us at 704-375-8488 to schedule a consultation. The law firm of Hull and Chandler is proud to sponsor the Leadership Series, a program where Hull and Chandler attorney Rocky Cabagnot interviews local and regional leaders in the nonprofit, private, and public sectors to discuss the real-world interplay of law, business, and social dynamics within the context of our continuously changing times. For over 16 years, Rocky has been helping nonprofits stay legally compliant, avoid legal problems, and feel secure in achieving mission. In addition to having represented scores of nonprofits and public charities, Rocky founded a legal clinic for nonprofits at an ABA law school and served as executive director of a multi-million-dollar 501c3. So Rocky, take it away.
All right. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of our leadership series here at Hull and Chandler. Again, thank you for that intro, Shannon. Yeah, I mean, again, thank you so much for coming on a Wednesday right after Labor Day. So I think we're all trying to find our footing once again in our quote unquote business and professional lives. So, but today's topic is going to be really important. And I think this is important, obviously, more than just nonprofits, but the for-profit of just any organization. We're talking about cybersecurity and privacy. You know, I kind of highlighted it here. Where did I put it? So this is a letter I just got maybe last month from Novant. So I don't even go to Novant anymore. I actually went to a different doctor, but basically Novant sent this letter, basically said that we recognize the importance of privacy and we care about your trust in us. We want to be as transparent because sensitive information may have been transmitted to Facebook in error. And they go on to talk about our records indicate you logged into your MyChart and your personal health information might have been on Facebook. Well, thank you, Novant. That's great to know that. There are things that I turn.
Meeting is being recorded.
Okay, what happened here? Something. Why is my Okay, well, I guess we'll just have to run with this here. But anyway, you know, privacy, cybersecurity, it's really just, it's ubiquitous, and a breach is going to happen to everybody, and your personal information is out there. But if you are running an organization, whether it's a 501c3 that handles, processes donations, event registrations. What if you're a 501c3 or any organization that's handling what we call PHI, personally, health information, right? I mean, it's a nightmare from a PR standpoint, from possibly a legal standpoint. But how do you minimize those risks to your organization so you're not in the situation of sending out one of these mea culpa letters to people who, again, I'm fairly agnostic. I get some of these things all the time, but what if it is, a prize donor who credit card information got out? What if it is you're running a Head Start program and now all of the health information of the children that you have been, guiding and supervising is let loose now in somebody's spreadsheet? So to talk to us today about how your organization can address and protect itself against, cybersecurity risks to your organization is our new friend and new partner at our law firm, Ashe Lockhart. Now, normally before I start, because I like to crib that question about what was your path to nonprofit leadership, but maybe the crib the question to Ashe is, while he's not necessarily in the nonprofit sector per se, tell us a little bit about your path to becoming interested in cybersecurity and privacy and what brought you there, and then obviously what got you here, and tell us a little bit what you do for our firm and serving our clients.
Okay, well, my name is Ashe Lockhart. First name is spelled A-S-H-E. I am from Charlotte. I'm 63 years old. I grew up here, spent a lot of my life here, but not all of my life. I joined the Army when I was 23, I think, or I might have been 22. It doesn't really matter, I don't think. And I was in an electronic warfare intelligence operational capacity when I was in the Army. And that was probably the place where I first got interested in cyber, for lack of a better way of putting it. And I was sent to foreign language school out in California, and was in the 82nd Airborne Division for a while, and did all kinds of really interesting things.
You actually jump out of an airplane?
Yes, jumped out of perfectly good airplanes, as a matter of fact.
How many times?
Excuse me?
How many times have you jumped out of an airplane? I'm just curious. This is cool. I mean, I didn't even know this.
You know, I don't know. I actually have my jump record, and I looked at it in the past 5 years, and it was not a very large number of jumps because I was only in the 82nd Airborne for 14 months before I got pulled out of the 82nd and put in a unit that's called Crazy Horse. And I think that my jump record showed that I had something like 12 or 15 jumps. Interesting thing about that, though, is when I was assigned to Fort Bragg in the 82nd Airborne, I was in the 313th Military Intelligence Battalion. And that was a subsidiary unit of the 82nd Airborne. The unit has since then been deactivated. I think that the people who staffed that unit, which was 500 or 600 people in various types of military intelligence work, I think that they were all dispersed out to the combat teams and the brigades and whatnot, so that rather than centralizing the intelligence function, they dispersed it to get it closer to the troops on the ground. But I don't know that for a fact. Anyway, when I got there, I was not airborne qualified. I had no intention of going to jump school. And I was very disappointed that my first assignment after a year and a half of training was to be in the 82nd. I wanted to be either at National Security Agency at Fort Meade, Maryland, or a field station doing intercept work and things of that sort. But the Army, in its infinite wisdom, sent me to a tactical unit. It didn't take me long to realize that life in a tactical unit, especially a gung-ho kind of hardcore environment like the 82nd, is going to be miserable if you're not one of the guys. Everybody would drop you for push-ups if you weren't airborne qualified and all that kind of thing. It was going to be unpleasant. And then the other thing was, running PT every morning, physical training at dark 30, running up and down the road, singing all these crazy songs about killing people and whatnot. You couldn't help but get kind of gung-ho at some point. I mean, even if you're really not into that sort of thing, it's a little bit infectious. That's why they do it. It's, it's a morale boosting, stimulating sort of environment. And so I got into that, and I eventually went to jump school. And in jump school, when they send you to jump school at Fort Bragg, there's a series of jump schools they run on base rather than sending you off to Fort Benning, Georgia, which is where most of the jump school activity takes place. But at Bragg, they would run a jump school. They called it the Gentleman's Jump School because it was only 2 weeks.
Wearing a top hat and tails, I guess.
Yeah. But it was an interesting experience, and so I did jump. And in jump school, the weather at Bragg wasn't cooperating with us. When you're doing airborne operations, you can only jump when the winds are below a certain number. And
it sounds like they really just ran you through the paces so much that you decided this wasn't for me, and you decided let's go to law school, right? Is that sort of what happened?
Well, in my experience in the Army, I did start to think of law school, but in jump school, the weather wasn't cooperating. So we did 4 of our 5 jumps at night when the air was still. And nighttime jumps are a lot different than daytime jumps because you can't see the ground coming up to you. it's just a really interesting way of learning how to jump.
Yeah.
But
So
anyway, I did that, and in the process of working in that environment, I became acquainted with the internet.
Okay.
And I became acquainted with all kinds of electronic warfare activity that you read about in the paper from time to time nowadays, as we're, occasionally you'll see news break about how the United States knows that Russia did something in Ukraine or whatever. And a lot of times that's based on intercept and electronic warfare operations that are conducted all around. So while I was in the Army, I did start to learn a lot about foreign policy and national defense, and just got interested in that as a subject. When I got out, I went to college and went to UNC Charlotte, studied history with a minor in international studies, and all of my history was Mexican and Vietnam and European and stuff like that. I was just really interested in this national defense, foreign policy kind of thing.
Well, that's interesting, because I think that in many respects, it seems that you know cybersecurity, but then you hear the term cyber warfare, right? And it seems like you seem to be somebody who's well suited to advise, clients about defending their cybersecurity integrity, because it is a little bit like a war out there, and you kind of maybe have to have that mindset that there is an, there's some sort of enemy out there who's trying to get inside and get a hold of your data for whatever reason, or something like that. I don't know, just kind of a frame to kind of look at this, to look at your experience and sort of maybe the approach that you take to defending your clients about their cybersecurity.
Well, it's interesting you should say that, Rocky, because even more than just being a mindset that I have or an approach that I take, some of the folks that are out there threatening our security are state actors.
That's true.
They are acting at the behest of Russia or China. Those are the two biggest, but there's plenty of them. And some of it is just pure blackmail to try to get money, because they're using this as a tool to generate income. A lot of the African countries that engage in ransomware and things of that sort, I can't sit here and tell you that Nigeria, which is probably the leader of all that, is literally funding the people who go and rip money off from Americans through ransomware attacks. But it wouldn't surprise me, because it's a lucrative business. So we are at the private enterprise level, at the nonprofit level, at the city and local government level, all these ransomware attacks, some of them are funded by state actors, and you are in a state of cyber war when something like this happens. And it's not terribly different than what you need to do if you are trying to protect tax records at the IRS from foreign intrusion. And of course, foreign actors would love to have access to the tax records of every American.
And has this been, and I mean, obviously the internet has been around for maybe 30, 40 years or something like that. But I guess the idea of just somebody trying to get inside of your data has been there it's almost like spying, right? It's been there for some time now, but obviously the stakes have gotten higher. And so, I think definitely it sounds like you've had a lot of experience both from the Army and then in your legal career dealing with privacy and cybersecurity. And so maybe we could just go ahead and kind of like I know the audience here is kind of they probably all either involved or manage organizations. Well, I think in this modern America, I think every organization has some kind of cyber security risk, right? At some level. If you've got a computer and a phone, I mean, I think that at some level there is that issue. So say for instance, I'm going to put back my old executive director hat because these are things I had to deal with, right? When I was managing an organization, we would outsource our IT, which obviously has some issues there in and of itself about privacy and such, but many of them would come by and say, oh, well, your server is this, and we really want to focus what your passwords were, and everyone you got X amount of people on your staff whose password is password, Rocky. I mean, things of that nature. And so, say for instance, I come to you as a client, and I'm like, I got the same thing that Rocky got, the Novant. I'm getting really kind of worried about our donor information. You know, we sell things, right? We do e-commerce, right? We sell T-shirts or tickets or something to our fundraising events. And people are punching in their PayPal, their whatever, their credit card information. I'm worried about this. So if a nonprofit or any organization for the matter, definitely let's maybe focus on nonprofits, comes to you. I mean, what are some steps that a nonprofit can take to start to assess its own data risks?
Well, let me step back to something you said
Sure.
about how these efforts to steal information are go beyond and predate the common use of the internet. You know, the internet itself was developed in the 60s and 70s under the Advanced Research Projects Agency, which was a Department of Defense initiative that's still there. And they still are out there trying to figure out, you know, next generation warfare stuff. All kinds of advanced research projects go through that organization. And they developed it because they wanted a self-healing communications network for the United States in the event of a nuclear war. So that if a major center was taken out by a nuclear attack, all of the remaining centers could continue to communicate with one another as if nothing had happened. And so that was really the advent of it. And then research institutions and universities started getting pulled into it. And then in the 80s and 90s, Tim Berners-Lee, a physicist over in Europe, created a platform that ran on the internet called Inquire Within Upon Everything. And it was a way for him to keep notes straight and access to information straight. And it was essentially the beginning of what we now know as the World Wide Web. And then Mark Andreessen here in the United States put together what was really the first viable web browser, and that was Netscape Navigator.
I remember that thing.
And so even before the web, before the internet, attempts to steal people's personal information for the purpose of stealing their identity and committing various acts of fraud has been going on. So I was a banker between college and law school, and I did that for 5 years. And I was surprised in the training, in the management training program at what was then First Union, which is now Wells Fargo. I think they've been through a few iterations between then and now. In the management training program, that was where I was first introduced in the late 80s to how widespread the phenomenon is of people stealing information. And back in those days, the way it worked is people would steal mail from your mailbox. And they would get your bank statement, and they would, you know, after a couple of thefts from a single person's mailbox, they might have enough information to be able to go out and get a car loan in that individual's name and then ride off into the sunset, leaving you on the hook for it. And so as a banker, we had to deal with that back in the 80s and before the web became a thing and identity theft became something that's actually in the news every day. So it has been around for a long time. This is just a new vehicle through which bad actors are doing their thing. And people in the right kinds of businesses have been wrestling with it for far longer than the internet was the conduit. And it's an interesting thing because this is a real problem that's been going on for years, and it's just exploded since the World Wide Web came here. And so if I'm advising somebody who's running an organization, whether it's a for-profit or anything else, you know, one of the things I want to do is help them understand what I've just explained, which is just a real thumbnail sketch of the history of the World Wide Web and the internet, and the fact that people have been trying to steal sensitive information for a very long time. This is nothing new. It's just the means by which they're doing it are different.
Right.
And so when I was a banker in the pre-internet era, one of the things that we used to advise our commercial clients on with some regularity is to make sure that they had adequate accounting controls in place to secure sensitive mail and checks. Because what would happen in the workplace is checks would get stolen. You know, somebody would just slip one check out of a stack sitting on somebody's desk in the controller's office. And they would run off and take that check and duplicate it And then
Right.
they start running some small transactions to generate a little bit of money, paying themselves maybe under a fake identity that they got from stealing somebody's identity in a mailbox. So the same sort of advice that a banker might have given somebody 30 or 40 years ago to secure sensitive information applies to the internet in very much the same way. If it discloses account numbers, personal identifiable information, you know, in the Army, it would be name, rank, and serial number. In the civilian world, it would be name, address, phone number, social security number is a big one, and account numbers. Secure all of that for everybody.
It sounds like, because you know, almost like on a like we're talking about like the history of like warfare and such, and the Constitution says, you know, protect against enemies, foreign and domestic, right? It sounds like there's a two-pronged thing, right? Because when you mention someone inside, right, your accounts receivable, your accounts payable takes a check, you know, it starts to go into business for themselves in some respects, right? You know, they're you know, that's an in-house threat, right? But then the state actors to all the other hackers and all the other people are kind of, obviously they're not members of your staff. These are, so I think that's an interesting thing to think about, is that as you start to kind of process how you start to assess your risk, there's like the internal risk, right? What do we do inside with our, you know, accounting controls, right? That's a big area right there. And if you don't have strong accounting controls, then yeah, I mean, that's where your inside sort of enemy can get you. But then obviously from the outside, you know, the ransomware, the phishing, all that other stuff. And I think that's probably, at least the way I'm hearing this, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that maybe in your analysis of, well, any organization, you need to think about your privacy and your, in your clients, your stakeholders information, both an outside point of view and then also an internal point of view. Like, how do you kind of defend against, again, your enemy, foreign and domestic, in a certain respect?
That's a really good way of thinking of it, I think, because we do have a foreign and domestic issue. I was a interim executive director of a small nonprofit 20, 30 years ago. I can't remember exactly.
Well, that's pain of heart. I'm gonna tell you that right now. That's why I'm back practicing law. It's not, it's not a nonprofit. It's not.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to make a living. In any event, the office manager in that organization decided that she needed a little bit of extra money. We weren't paying her enough. So she was responsible for cutting checks to any vendor that we needed to pay. And so she would cut checks to a fake name that she had made up, that she had opened an account in that name. She would make the checks out for that for, you know, reasonably small amounts of money, $100, $200, $300, $500. She would take control of those funds once they had been deposited into her account. Then she would go into the accounting system and she would change the name of the payee and the accounting system. And we didn't have adequate controls to deal with it. It just hadn't occurred to us that we might be facing an internal threat of that nature. But because she had access to the checks themselves and she had access to all the information about the various vendors that we did business with, she was able to use these vendor identities to pay herself. And then she was able to manipulate the accounting system to cover her tracks. And she got away with $30,000 or $40,000 before she was eventually caught. And then we were faced with the very unpleasant reality of whether to pursue recovery of the money through private means or to pursue law enforcement action against her. Law enforcement was unwilling to pursue its law enforcement activity against her for such a paltry amount of money if we were simultaneously pursuing a civil remedy to get our money back.
Well, Ash, tell you what, can you hold that thought? I just saw something pop up in the chat, and I think I think this makes it more interactive. I think someone wants to ask a question. So if whoever popped into the chat, if you want to just unmute yourself and ask a question, I think if it's long as hop in.
Yeah, no, sure. This is Glenn Ross. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I had a question about 3 or 4 minutes ago, but I had a call that came in and I had to grab it. So I'm sure I've changed the points that you were at. But my question is simply this. So given where we are now when it comes to stealing identity, theft, all these good things, how do you feel blockchain is going to change that? Because that is the future of the world. digital world. Everything's going to become digital. And at what point, I have several questions, but I'll just ask this one first. How do you think blockchain is going to impact that? So you talk about all the stealing that's taking place by different nations and so forth, by cyber attacks. That's on W2. Now we're going to be on W3. And so blockchain is going to be the method that it may take 50 years before hackers figure out how to actually hack blockchain. So, yeah, how do you see blockchain impacting that? I'm sorry.
That's a great question. I think that it will obviously be a target for hackers, and I imagine that hackers will be using similar strategies to some of the strategies they have now, which is to hack into an individual's computer and see if they can't find password information and things of that sort to hack into an individual account and transfer money in that manner. In other words, they are essentially spoofing the individual who has the blockchain balance to act as if they're doing a legitimate transaction and move it to an illegitimate account. There's a reason that so much of the ransomware stuff is asked to be paid on blockchain and other cyber currency modes, and that's because it's even the crime of stealing in that milieu is not well publicized. It's ripe for this kind of activity because it's largely unregulated. I mean, it's a brilliant system in many ways, but it's not impervious, and it's going to be compromised. It's just a question of when and how. And I would imagine that it's already being compromised from time to time on an individual level, unless you know something otherwise that I don't know.
I would tend to disagree with that, just because blockchain is a new concept that even the United States Federal Reserve is looking at undertaking through their own digital currency. So if they had found any instances of hackability to it, which at this point does not exist, it's a very complex mathematical approach to using the system and transferring data, transferring money. And so I don't really see that being hacked for, it may take them 50 years to figure out how to do that. But I was just, emphasizing that at some point the world is going to be completely digital, that the US mail system will go away because no one's sending mail. And everything that is transferred digitally. And just like your system to get into your computer, there will be a blockchain type access that makes it not hackable. So, and so I guess a better question or a simpler question is that, how long do you see it before the world becomes a blockchain world, completely digital world?
Well, I'm a lawyer. I don't have a crystal ball, so I have no earthly idea.
And I'm sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot. I was just curious to get another opinion about it that, is outside of technology or so forth. So I don't mean to put you on the spot. I apologize.
No, that's all right. I mean, it's a fair question, but I think that we've come so far in such a short period of time, and we wouldn't have imagined 25 years ago as Netscape Navigator version 1 was being released upon the world. I don't think we would have imagined then where we are now. So trying to imagine now where we're going to be in 5 or 10 or 25 years is just unimaginable. It's hard to comprehend how we could do that. But I think that kind of getting back to the issue of advising a nonprofit and illustrating the ways that things can happen, one of the things that's big deal right now is ransomware. And the way ransomware attacks commonly happen is somebody will send out thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of emails that spoof or pretend to be something that they're not. And we all get them. And sometimes those emails have a little tiny piece of code in them that burrows into your computer if you don't have the adequate defenses set up. And that would become the ransomware. And the ransomware will say, we're going to shut down all your computers and lock up all your data if you don't pay us $100,000 or $100 million by blockchain within 48 hours or something like that. And the organization that's affected by something like that will sometimes find itself in a really uncomfortable position of having to decide whether or not to pay the ransom because they realize we don't have the right kinds of backups to recover from something like this. They've compromised the backups as well as the live data, which frequently happens in these ransomware attacks. And they then are faced with this choice. Do I pay the ransom, or do I use some other tool to deal with this? Do I contact law enforcement and let them get involved? Law enforcement doesn't always have the same objective that the person who's the victim has. Law enforcement might want to pursue law enforcement activities that don't necessarily get you your data freed up. And, you know, this has happened to Atrium Healthcare. I think it happened, I don't know, 5 years ago or something to Atrium. It happened to, I believe it was Mecklenburg County. And you know, we had a period of time where basically all of the online services and computers for Mecklenburg County or certain functions within Mecklenburg County were locked up in a ransomware matter. It's a very, very common thing. And so there's lots of tools that we need to be using to try to protect against that. And one of the tools is everybody needs to be using good passwords. That may sound so stupid you can't even believe it's coming out of my mouth. It's just so obvious. But I believe, and I had a conversation yesterday with a guy who's a very intensely intelligent guy who works in the world of cloud computing and cloud computing architecture and things of this sort. And he disagrees a little bit with my assessment, but my assessment is based on what I've seen. And what I've seen is that a lot of times we see big problems happen, big compromises happen because the enforcement of complex passwords has been so lax. And the most common password in use today is the word password.
I know, I was telling you, like you said, X amount of people on your staff have password as their password.
Yeah.
I wasn't lying about that. That was an assessment I got.
Yeah, it's a real thing. In fact, to illustrate that, I worked at a very large law firm, and I was on the corporate tech committee. You know, we did the tech strategy for the firm. You know, we were the lawyers and staffers and computer engineer type people that were looking at the various systems that the firm used and trying to develop the policies to deal with the use of those systems. And we were looking at new systems to be more efficient and have better intellectual property control. Because at the end of the day, if you're a law firm, your stock in trade is intellectual property, knowledge capital, for lack of a better way of putting it. And at some point, we got into a series of meetings where we were talking about cybersecurity for the firm, not for our clients, but for the firm. And the CIO and his head of security, which this predates the use of the Chief Information Security Officer terminology, they were wanting us to use these key fobs that would have a rotating code on them, that in order to log into your computer, you would pull out your key fob and take a look at it, and you would use the code, the login ID. And what they did to illustrate to these attorneys who were stubbornly refusing to do this, they were adamant, I don't want to have to deal with that. And they were ugly about it, really. I mean, attorneys are not exactly easy people to work with on a day-to-day basis, as many of you probably know. And I'm not trying to put Rocky on the spot, but you know, attorneys are
easy to work with.
attorneys
I'm accepted.
they can be difficult, especially if they're on your side. In any event, what they did in this one meeting we had was they had a couple of engineers start working on hacking into individual attorneys' accounts, their universal login ID, which would log into their computer, their email, the whole shooting match. And in the 30 or so minutes at the beginning of the meeting, there were 12 people in the room, they hacked into 8 computers. And then they pointed out to the people who were in the room, you know, John, I just hacked into yours and you have an email from your wife asking you to pick up apples and bananas on the way home from work today. You know, it was very embarrassing to everybody. But these guys were using these, and they also disclosed the passwords that they used to successfully hack into these accounts. So it was embarrassing to a lot of the attorneys who were pitching a fit about not wanting to have an extra layer of security. But it illustrated the point very well that a lot of people who should know better don't. And even if they do know better, they're looking for convenience and they're not willing often to take the right steps. And y'all, probably some of you are like that yourselves. And I guarantee you have staff people that are working in your organization that are like that. You probably have board members who are like that. And all of those people, all of those volunteers, board members, staff members, all of them have access to information that you probably don't want out in the world. And the starting point for dealing with this is passwords and using complex passwords. Once upon a time, the advice was use complex passwords and change them every 30 days or every 90 days or something like that. What I'm seeing now is a lot more people in the chief information security officer role are saying, no, we shouldn't be requiring people to change their passwords every month or every quarter, because in doing that, we are encouraging people to use easy passwords because they can't remember complex passwords that change every month. So it's better to have a complex password that doesn't change frequently than to have an easy password that does. And another thing that people are recommending a lot for this password issue is to use Password Manager. There's LastPass, there's 1Password, there's a bunch of them. I don't even know what they all are. I personally use 1Password. I used to use LastPass. I used a different one, a third one that was the much better looking software interface than the two I just mentioned. At that point in my life, I was kind of looking for pretty software and less concerned about functionality, but those things are critical to any organization that's trying to secure its systems and data from unauthorized use or intrusion. And let me mention one other thing that deals with this topic generally, and that deals with ransomware. So ransomware, you know, they're basically locking up your computer system, and if you don't give them money, they're going to shut your computer system down and corrupt your data or destroy your data in some way. One of the things that they used to not be doing as much, they didn't used to exfiltrate the data. They didn't take the data. They just controlled the systems that held the data. Now, some was exfiltrated or taken or removed or copied, duplicated in some way. But as a general rule, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, the folks who were doing these ransomware attacks were primarily interested not in the data itself, but in denying you the use of the data. Now they're doing more of both. They're denying your use of the data, and to the extent that they can, and they can't always, they try to get as much data as they can so that they can sell that data to the folks who do whatever they do with the stolen data. So the reason that matters is because your obligation as an organization to notify the people whose data was stolen is triggered not necessarily when somebody locks your data up, but it would be triggered when somebody takes the data. So a breach compromise, such as the one Novant sent out to Rocky that he showed us at the beginning, is triggered when the data is taken and or somehow distributed or publicized, displayed in some unauthorized manner. That's when they have the obligation to send out those mea culpa letters, and those can be very disruptive to your brand integrity. So when you're talking about business risks, one of the most important risks that you'll ever face is reputational risk, risk to your reputation. If you're a nonprofit and you start having problems with reputational risks, you know, it can be a life-threatening situation to your organization.
Well, we got a question here in the chat, Ash, from Derek. And I don't know, Derek, if you want to unmute yourself or you want me to read your question. What would you prefer? I think he's unmuted. So. Hey.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely. You want to just ask your question, or do you want me to read it, or?
Yeah, I'm glad to tee it up. I'm thinking back to a time a couple of years ago where a client of mine, as a commercial banker, so Ash, I guess we have that in common, but the client got hit by a ransomware attack and was kind of stuck in the process of getting through that. He had said that he had done some research and determined that there was honor among thieves, and that by paying the ransom that he would be able to get his information returned, or his access to his information, I suppose. But I started thinking about this in the context of being a board member for a not-for-profit. If that were to happen, I begin wondering about, what are the legal and ethical implications of me, especially as a banker, of trying to find ways to resolve that situation. So I'm just curious about what recommendations would you have to me of things to do and not do in that situation.
Good question.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I haven't really looked at and I should. Actually, let me just take a quick note to myself.
Derek, I'll just jump in. As far as your issue as a board member, again, I don't know if you were thinking about utilizing your position as a board member to try to access capital to like pay this, or was it more to just sort of
not so much the conflict of interest part, but just the idea of me being a party of paying a ransom.
So as a board member, and assume it's a North Carolina nonprofit, well, pretty much this is the case across the country. You have certain fiduciary duties as a board member, and probably one of the most important ones is the duty of care, which I think could play into that. But at the same time, you don't necessarily have a duty to obviously access capital to try to help. Because if you think about it, one of the reasons why you're brought on a board is because you have access to certain resources or know certain people or something of that nature. I think definitely if it is your bank and your bank is to transact with the organization, it does bring up the other fiduciary duty of loyalty, which brings up potential of a conflict, but you'd have to just run the transaction through your conflict of interest policy. Most likely would be that you would have to be you'd have to be excised from that discussion and from any kind of vote related to whether to use your bank to pay off the ransomware. Is that kind of like in the same area, or is?
That was my concern. Is if I were involved in paying a ransom, I think there's some implications there in any situation. But and this is a little bit different because it's data. It's and I do get the situation that my client was in was, they were losing more money per day not being able to operate than the ransom was. So it was a no-brainer to him to say, of course, from setting everything else aside, the financial decision was a no-brainer. So, and that could be the same with a not-for-profit. I suppose probably not as much or not as clear, but it did get me thinking that would put me in a little bit of a difficult situation to be a party of abetting an illegal transaction.
I think that definitely would need some analysis, but I think ultimately as a director, you've got to do what you have to do to protect the organization. You have a fiduciary duty to the nonprofit to whatever extent. Now, again, if the solution relates to any sort of entity that you have any kind of business interest in, like your bank or something like that, then that would have to be discussed. But you and any other interested parties on your board would not be involved with that. And of course, and that's why those nonprofits should have a conflict of interest policy to be able to run transactions like that. And again, time is of the essence, and but if those remaining directors, if they're there and they're not interested in your bank, they have nothing to do, but they see the business value, they see the value proposition of let's stop the bleeding. I think that it can be defensible, but I think would not be defensible is you being part of that vote. that would be not defensible. So I think that that could be, you know, what they call like that can be definitely a challenge transaction. But you know, those are you know, I think this is a great dovetail of both mine and Ash's worlds, where I represent the nonprofits and kind of advise them at corporate governance issues like this. Then what leads to this, of course, is people having password as a password. You know, I mean, it's just, I mean, that's
Right,
one
right.
of the go ahead.
I will say that my client was rather embarrassed to say what his login and password were because they were so ridiculously easy. 5-letter dictionary word. I'll just leave it at that point, but it was quite easy to get into. So kind of sad. And then the other thing is, you know, we talked about this transaction was, you know, how amazing is it that these otherwise intelligent people who could earn a pretty good living doing legal things in the computer world, you know, take this route instead. It's kind of a sad statement there.
Yeah, they need to have password class in law school. You know, like you have to take 1 hour just how to make effective passwords or something. Because, yeah, no, I mean that's you know, I think it was like I said when I had the IT people when I was running my nonprofit at 300 FTE, you know, program, and they did an assessment and they kind of turned out that, you know, your X amount of, you know, I mean, when I say X, it was like 20, 25, 30% of your staff have password or some variation of the word password as their as their, you know, as their password. And so I think that it's kind of like maybe it's kind of like driving around without a seatbelt on, but you're in control, but maybe you're not in like a road, you're just kind of by yourself out in the field or something. It's that sort of like, you know, what are the chances of something happening, you know, to me? And I think that's probably the most important thing here. And I think even the nonprofit sector needs to really think about is that I think there is that sort of level of no one's looking at us, so who cares? You know, we're kind of running under the radar. We've never been a blip on anyone's radar. But you know, nonprofits span from, you know, again, your neighborhood association to, you know, these endowments, right? And you know that there's some folks there who really need to start thinking about it. And I would say like those community foundations, they got a lot of bank. They've got a lot of investments. They're investing things all the time, like the Foundation for the Carolinas or the other ones like that, 501c3s, but they have billions of dollars floating around and all kinds of, you know, and again, like university endowments, you know, I mean, that's like, it's a 501c3 and that is serious, you know, money. And I think that, again, while, you know, we're looking at the nonprofit thinking, oh, well, you know, I do an after school program, I need to, but ultimately, yeah, I mean, it sounds like from what Ash is saying is that the key to this starts with number one, just password security and maybe getting over the inertia of, do I have to change it to this weird XYZ hashtag 375 type of password? But it really makes the difference between what you're talking about, Derek, is like a ransomware attack and not. And I think that it definitely taking it more seriously. I think that would probably be a change in the culture, you know, for everybody, honestly, because you know it's kind of like you never think of a problem until it happens to you. But I think that we've got to get over that. It hasn't happened to me yet, so you know, let's just continue along. Is that this is the new normal, you know? And if you don't, you know, you've got to kind of be a little more vigilant, not just a little more, a lot more vigilant. You know, at least that's my take. Just having been in that sphere for a little bit. Again, what are the chances of it? Like probably low, possibly, but at the same time, the damage, the ramifications, particularly of losing that, are extremely high. And I think that the pain's not that big compared to the damage. And I think if people kind of saw it that way, like the password policy, it's a pain in the butt versus, you know, having to fork out 200 grand to like get out of a ransomware attack. I think you can kind of start talking about the cost benefits. It's probably worth, you know, overhauling and definitely policing your password situation. That's my spiel. Ash, you got anything on that?
Well, I think all that's good conversation, and I don't want to try to necessarily add anything to it. I do think that it's a very difficult situation to be in when you have ransomware. You know, do you pay it or do you fight it in some way? And if you're going to fight it, how do you fight it? I think there's some legal issues around whether or not you pay it, and they're going to be unique in each situation. And so it's a little bit hard to answer it right now.
Yeah.
I think that there's some professional responsibility issues around that as well.
So let's fast forward a little bit. So we've been talking about trying to prevent, right? But this obviously, this letter I have here is this has nothing to do with prevention. This is the mea culpa thing. So what do you tell a client, or what is the process like if there is a breach, right? Because that's the nightmare, right? But let's say the nightmare happens, and you're an ED, you're whatever IT staff or whoever in the organization, and you realize that your system has been compromised. What do you do? Do we go to you first and ask, or do we just who do we call it? I guess insurance policy. I don't know what, because that's kind of the nightmare. Is like a breach has been dumped on your lap, and you're in a position of management, and you have your board, but they're kind of just hoping that they delegated to you as a director, as a CEO or whatever, take care of it. How do you handle when the worst occurs?
I think that my experience has been that whoever discovers the problem, and let's just say for simplicity's sake that it's an exfiltration of data. There has been a breach and there has been a compromise of data. Not all breaches result in a compromise of data. But let's just say that there's been a breach and it is believed. We don't know for sure, but we believe that there is a compromise of data. The first person that should be contacted would be the person who sits in the Chief Information Security Officer role. If you have somebody who's a Chief Privacy Officer, that person should also be contacted. You may have people who serve in those roles even if they don't have those titles. So who's in charge of information security and who's in charge of privacy from a policy perspective? Get them both involved and keep the circle of people who know about this as narrow as humanly possible. That's step one. Notify the right people. Don't notify the CFO and the CEO and the executive director and whatnot until you got a little bit of information. Just, do a little bit of due diligence out of the gate. And then the second thing is to determine to the greatest extent that you can with certainty, has there actually been a data breach? Has information been taken? Has it been compromised? Has it been exfiltrated out of your system, out of your control? It's not just they've denied your access to it, but they've taken it, such as with Target or Home Depot or now Novant. Has it been taken? And once you've identified those simple things, I think that's when you want to make sure that your management hierarchy is in tune with things. Now, when I said don't necessarily contact the CFO or the CEO or the executive director, I don't want that to sound like an opportunity or an excuse for some of the folks who are involved in security and privacy to conceal that kind of information. And it's going to be a case-by-case basis as to what you do. But my experience is that when you go to the CEO and you tell the CEO or the executive director, we think we've been hacked, the first thing the CEO is going to say is, what the fuck do you mean you think you've been hacked? Either you've been hacked or you haven't. So get enough information that when you break the conversation with the senior management, you know something. Don't just go and bring them a potential problem, because you might not have a problem. So make sure you've got a problem, then go speak to them about it and be able and be prepared to have some conversation about it. That would be my first thing. Second thing would be the attorney should be brought in immediately once you know that there is, or once you believe that there is a breach and an exfiltration of information. The attorney is the person who's going to help you decide whether or not the information that's been breached is actually breached, and whether or not it is breached in a way that legally requires you to give notice to affected parties. Each state has its own notification requirements. And so you have a certain window of time within which to give notice Window of time being the time from when you know of a breach. Now, some states may have a statute that says from the time of the breach. So if the breach happens on May the 1st and you don't find out until August the 30th that there's been a breach, and there's a 30-day window within which you have to report, you're out of whack with the reporting requirement upon discovery. And that's a little bit problematic. I think most of the states have corrected their statutes in such a way that it's a certain number of days from notice or awareness of the breach rather than from the time of the breach itself, because a lot of times it takes weeks, months to learn that there has been a breach. And I suspect there are breaches that are never discovered. I suspect that's probably a fact. So when you know of a breach, and once you've got a suspicion of a breach, A, dig into it, make sure, find out everything you possibly can and move heaven and earth to do that. B, go talk to management, and then management and these systems people need to get together and bring in their legal counsel to advise on notification requirements and what they need to do for remediation.
So what about, so I know one of the things that when I was running the nonprofit that was kind of told to me was to, because of this, is to make sure that you have something like cybersecurity insurance or something like that. Could you talk a little bit about what that is, and is it a good thing to have? Or, I mean, obviously it's probably a good thing to have, but what is it? What would that do? Because I mean, that's what you hear in the nonprofit sector, because no one's saying like, have your counsel, but they do say stuff like, well, you should have some kind of policy on cybersecurity. But that's it. It's always just like some slide and some presentation, and then they go to the next thing. I mean,
well, it's really a very easy thing to deal with. I mean, you just call the same carrier you have, or the same agency that you use for your commercial general liability or your E&O or directors and officers coverage. Whatever business insurance you already have, just contact it's a property and casualty matter. So you would contact that person, whoever is your advisor, and ask them about it and let them educate you with respect to what they carry, what lines they carry, how they advise that you employ it. And if they're not up to speed on it, ask them if they have somebody within their organization who is up to speed on it. And if not, you need to think about going somewhere else for your coverage, because it's a very common thing. And I started working at a large global corporation back in 2017, which seems like an eon ago, but it was just a short time ago, called Compass Group. And they're based out of Chertsey, which is in near London. And they have 600,000 employees around the world. They have 300 and some odd thousand in North America. It's a massive global organization. It's the largest food service company in the world. And so one of the things that I noticed in that environment is we want to try to keep this as close to the chest as humanly possible in terms of what we think has happened. And we want to control the information. And if we don't have to make disclosures and notifications and all that sort of thing, then we won't, because the reputational harm that goes with it is so significant. I'm sort of matching up two topics there, but I think that's helpful.
And no, this has been a great discussion. I feel like, we could go for more, and maybe we need to have a part 2 to this. I don't know. But it does definitely, and I would say that it's good to know that there are attorneys that, I mean, obviously all attorneys can learn up on this, but with the time is of the essence aspect of it, like if I were running the community action agency and something like that happened, I know a little bit about this area, right? But I don't know as much as like someone like Ashe does. And I think it's good to know that there are attorneys like Ashe out there that you can call when the proverbial hits the fan, when it comes, that if that does happen, that counsel comes, because remember the PR risk, right? So attorney is bound by attorney-client. We can't talk about anything. So anything you tell us about what's going on, even the worst password in the world will never come out of the mouth, right? So that should be an incentive to to you that when, and I'm saying when, because I think that it's not a matter of
Yeah.
if, it's a matter of when these things happen. You know, I mean, it's so ubiquitous. It's everywhere, and they're coming from, like, again, the issues may be coming from inside. You know, like the phone calls coming from inside. That it could be from the inside. You know, with obviously accounting controls and things of that nature, where your problem is coming from inside, the proverbial phone call coming from inside the house situation, or obviously things such as ransomware and all these other breaches and things of that nature. But it is good to know that we do have an attorney on our firm like Ashe, who, like, should that happen, that they can come in and help be sort of like a cleaner in a way. But I do also think that now there is also that adage, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so, are there things that attorneys should be doing to advise their clients from the preventative standpoint, as opposed to, obviously, you got to do this notice and we got to shut this down, and this got, from the damage control aspect? But are there some ounce of prevention type of things that attorneys can do better for their clients in this field?
Yeah, so I'm going to speak briefly to that, and I think we're at our time limit. There's one other ounce of prevention piece that I think attorneys and management should be working on more diligently throughout all types of business and activity around the country and the world, and that is to teach people to be more critical in their assessment of the email traffic and chat traffic and text traffic that's coming into them. If you don't know who it is, tune your BS detector to be very sensitive. Because what we're looking for here is phishing and spoofing kind of things, where we get these emails, it looks like it's from a legitimate source, but there's one character different in the email address or something like that. And it's asking for something that, when you're in the rush of the day, it may seem, oh yeah, they need my login information in order to do such and such on our bank account or something like that. That's one of the significant areas of phishing that results in all kinds of nefarious activity, data breaches and stuff like that. So we need to train ourselves and the people that we work with to be very sensitive to the legitimacy. We need to be critical. We need to exercise our critical thinking skills to doubt whether or not something is legitimate before we click on a link, open an attachment, or reply with any information that matters at all. When I get information from banks and various things like that, that I've got a bad transaction on my card or something like that, an apparently fraudulent transaction, I don't click the link in the email or the text message. I go to my credit card or my debit card and I use the 800 number off the back of that, or I log in on my computer from a web address that I've saved on my computer, because I don't trust the emails, I don't trust the text messages to be legitimate, and I don't want to spend 5 minutes trying to figure out if they are legitimate. It's easier to just call a number that I know to be the correct number, or to click a link on my bookmarks in my computer that I know to be the right link. And that way I completely avoid the possibility of a lot of these emails that are spoofing and phishing and scamming, from either putting a corrupt code into my computer or obtaining information from me that they ought not have.
All right. Well, guys, thank you so much. Ashe, thank you for coming on to the leadership series. I feel like this is definitely one of those meat on the bone, type of episodes. Not that we don't have like other episodes are like that. They're all like that. But I think definitely if you came here for information, you got it. We definitely will be uploading this onto our YouTube channel. So you can always search Hull and Chandler Leadership Series on YouTube. We'll pop up there. We'll have this episode up in the next couple of days. And Ashe, I think definitely welcome aboard again to our team here at Hull and Chandler. And it's great to have someone on staff who knows this area, because this is going to happen, and it's going to happen to my clients. And I know exactly where to drive them if this happens, immediately. And so, again, everybody, thank you for joining us today for the Hull and Chandler Leadership. We'll probably do some kind of follow-up. Maybe we'll do a live Q&A at that Community Matters Cafe. Shannon, hint, that with this, I feel like it's a hot topic. I can just feel like the people are really interested in this, and you know, you got to give people what they want. So, all right. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your week. And again, Ashe, thank you. And Shannon, whenever you're ready to cut it.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Bye, everybody. Have a great day.